The sound of gunshots echoed through the streets of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1878, as Josephine Campbell pressed her back against the weathered wall of the saloon, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst through her chest. Blood trickled down her arm from the graze wound she'd sustained while fleeing the men who'd tracked her across 3 states. She couldn't run anymore, not tonight, not in this condition. "I won't go back," she whispered to herself, clutching the leather satchel that contained everything she owned. "I'd rather die." The night was moonless, offering the perfect cover for a woman trying to disappear. Josephine slipped deeper into the shadows between the buildings, her once fine dress now tattered and stained with dust from the long journey. She'd been beautiful, once the toast of Boston society before everything changed. Now her honey blonde hair hung in limp strands around her pale face, and her blue eyes were constantly scanning for danger. She heard the sound of spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk and froze, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall, willing herself to become invisible. The footsteps came closer, then paused. "I know you're there," a deep voice called out, quiet but firm. "I've been tracking you since you got off that stage 3 hours ago." Josephine's breath caught. She'd been so careful. How had anyone spotted her? "I'm not looking to hurt you, madam," the voice continued, softer now. "But you're bleeding, and those men who came in on the evening train are asking about a woman matching your description." She remained silent, calculating her options. She could run, but in her weakened state, she wouldn't get far. She could fight, but the small derringer in her pocket would be little help against a determined man. "I can help you," he said, stepping closer to her hiding place. "If you'll let me." The man who emerged from the darkness was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his Stetson. But even in the darkness, she could make out striking features: a strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes that seemed to see right through her pretenses. "Why would you help me?" Josephine whispered, her fingers tightening around the derringer in her pocket. He took another step, and moonlight breaking through the clouds revealed his face fully. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, nothing fancy, but clean and well-kept. "Name's Nathan Blackburn," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I run the Doubleby Ranch just outside of town, and you're all I've been seeking since I got word that Thomas Campbell's daughter might be passing through these parts." Josephine stiffened at the mention of her father's name. "How do you know who I am?" "Your father was my friend," Nathan replied. "He wrote to me before he died, asked me to look out for you if I could, said you might be in trouble." "My father died 6 months ago," she said, her voice catching, "and I've been running ever since." "From Harlan Doyle," Nathan said, not a question but a statement. "I know about your so-called husband and what he did to your father's business, what he tried to do to you." Josephine swayed slightly, light-headed from blood loss and shock. "How could you possibly know all that?" "Like I said, your father and I corresponded. He was worried about you marrying Doyle. Turns out he had good reason." Nathan took another step forward, slowly removing his coat. "Now, will you let me help you before you collapse or those men find you?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding, the fight draining out of her as exhaustion took hold. As she stepped toward him, her knees buckled. Nathan moved with surprising speed for a man his size, catching her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," he murmured, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "They'll kill me if they find me," Josephine whispered. "I know too much about Harlan's business dealings, illegal dealings. They won't find you," Nathan promised, his voice hard with determination. "Not where I'm taking you." He lifted her easily into his arms, and despite her usual wariness, Josephine found herself relaxing against the solid warmth of his chest. She was so tired of running, of being afraid. "My horse is tied up behind the general store," he said, moving through the shadows with a stealth that seemed at odds with his size. "Can you stay awake that long?" "I've stayed awake through worse," she replied, thinking of the nights she'd spent hiding in barns and freight cars, too terrified to close her eyes. Nathan's horse was a magnificent beast, a black stallion that stood patiently as Nathan carefully settled Josephine in the saddle. He mounted up behind her, one strong arm around her waist to keep her steady. "It's about an hour's ride to my place," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Think you can make it? Do I have a choice?" she asked, trying to sound stronger than she felt. She felt rather than heard his soft chuckle. "Not really, Miss Campbell. Not really." As they rode away from Willow Creek, Josephine looked back at the small frontier town that had almost been her undoing. In the distance, she saw men with lanterns moving through the streets, searching for her. "They won't give up," she said quietly. Nathan's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Neither will I." The night air was cool against Josephine's face as they rode across the open prairie. The vastness of the Montana Territory stretched out before them, a sea of darkness beneath a canopy of stars. Despite her exhaustion and the pain in her arm, she found herself marveling at the beauty of it all. "I never imagined it would be like this," she murmured half to herself. "Like what?" Nathan asked, his voice a low rumble against her back. "So open, so free." She gestured weakly at the landscape. "In Boston, everything is crowded together. Buildings, people, obligations. Here it's like you can breathe." "That's why I stayed," he replied. "Came out here after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Found something I never had back east. Peace," she guessed. "Purpose," he corrected. "A man needs that more than peace." They fell into silence after that, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional cry of a night bird. Josephine felt herself drifting, lulled by the motion and the warmth of the man behind her. "Stay with me," Nathan said, jostling her gently. "We're almost there." She forced her eyes open to see a large, two-story house emerging from the darkness. It wasn't what she had expected from a ranch house in the territories. It was substantial, well-built, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. "You live here alone?" she asked, surprised. "No," he replied. "My foreman, Miguel, and his wife, Elena, live in the house too. They help me run the place. There are also several ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse." He guided the horse to a hitching post and dismounted in one fluid motion before reaching up to help her down. Her legs threatened to give way as her feet touched the ground, but Nathan steadied her. "Elena!" he called out as he helped Josephine up the porch steps. "I need your help." The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged Mexican woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She took one look at Josephine and began issuing rapid-fire instructions in Spanish to someone behind her. "Bring her in," Elena said to Nathan, her accent thick but her English clear. "I have prepared the guest room." "You knew I was bringing someone back?" Josephine asked, looking between them. Nathan shrugged. "Elena always knows what's needed before I do." The inside of the house was warm and inviting, with solid furniture and colorful woven blankets that added a touch of brightness to the practical frontier home. Elena led them upstairs to a bedroom with a large four-poster bed and a crackling fire in the hearth. "Sit," she commanded, pointing Josephine to a chair by the fire. "I must see you're wound." As Elena carefully cleaned and bandaged the graze on Josephine's arm, Nathan leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "Those men in town," he said. "How long have they been following you?" Josephine winced as Elena applied a stinging solution to the wound. "These particular men? I don't know. Harlan has had people searching for me since I fled Boston. Each time I think I've lost them, new ones appear." "What exactly does your husband want from you?" Nathan asked. "Ex-husband," she corrected sharply. The marriage was annulled when it was discovered he was already married to a woman in Philadelphia. Her laugh was bitter. Apparently, I wasn't the first heiress he'd targeted. Elena clucked her tongue sympathetically as she wrapped clean bandages around Josephine's arm. Harlan forged my father's signature on documents transferring ownership of our shipping company to him, Josephine continued. I discovered the forgeries in my father's study after his death. When I confronted Harlan, She trailed off, her hand instinctively going to her throat where faint bruises still lingered. He tried to silence you, Nathan finished for her, his voice hard. She nodded. I managed to take the forged documents with me when I escaped. They're the only proof I have that he killed my father and stole our business. Without them, it would be his word against mine, and in Boston society. A woman's word doesn't count for much, Nathan said grimly. Especially against a man like Doyle. There, Elena said, tying off the bandage. It is not deep, but you have lost blood and need rest. I will bring you something to eat, and then you must sleep. She bustled out of the room, patting Nathan's arm as she passed him. Your father's letters didn't mention that Doyle had actually managed to marry you, Nathan said after Elena had gone. Last I heard, you were being courted by him, but your father was having second thoughts about the match. Josephine's eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. Papa became suspicious too late. Harlan had already ingratiated himself with all of Boston society. He was charming, successful in business. Everyone thought I was fortunate to have caught his eye. She looked down at her hands. By the time my father discovered some discrepancies in Harlan's background, the wedding was only weeks away. When Papa tried to delay it, he suddenly fell ill. Poison? Nathan asked bluntly. She nodded. I believe so. The doctor called it heart failure, but my father had never had heart problems before. He died 3 days after the wedding. Nathan crossed the room to kneel before her, taking her hands in his much larger ones. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Your father's last letter reached me too late. You couldn't have known, she said, surprised by the genuine regret in his eyes. No one could have predicted how quickly Harlan would move. Elena returned with a tray bearing a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a cup of tea. The smell made Josephine's stomach growl embarrassingly loud, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early that morning. Eat, Elena instructed. Then rest. No one will find you here. As Josephine ate, Nathan paced the room, stopping occasionally to look out the window into the darkness. His restlessness was at odds with the calm, steady demeanor he'd shown so far. What will you do now? He asked finally, turning to face her. She set down her spoon, considering. I need to get to San Francisco. There's a federal prosecutor there who's been building a case against Harlan for other fraudulent business dealings. With my evidence, he might be able to bring charges that will stick. San Francisco is still a long way from here, Nathan pointed out. And Doyle's men are between you and there. I know, she said, her shoulders slumping with fatigue. But I have to try. It's the only way I'll ever be free. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, seeming to debate something with himself. Finally, he nodded once, as if coming to a decision. We'll figure it out in the morning, he said, his tone gentler than before. For now, get some sleep. You're safe here. As he turned to leave, Josephine called out, Mr. Blackburn? He paused at the door. Nathan, he corrected. Just Nathan. Nathan, she repeated softly. Thank you. I'm not used to people helping me without expecting something in return. A smile flickered across his face, transforming his stern features into something quite handsome. Your father was a good man who helped me when I needed it. Consider this repaying a debt. After he left, Josephine changed into a nightgown Elena had provided and slipped between the clean sheets of the bed. It was the most comfortable place she'd slept in months, and despite the tumult of the day, She found herself drifting off almost immediately. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that, for the first time since her father died, she felt safe. The smell of coffee and bacon woke Josephine the next morning. For a moment, she was disoriented and used to waking in a real bed in a peaceful room. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up, wincing at the pull of the wound on her arm. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and Josephine realized she must have slept late. A basin of fresh water sat on the dresser, and someone had placed a simple but clean dress across the foot of the bed. Her own clothes were nowhere to be seen, though her precious satchel with the documents was safely on the chair where she'd left it. After washing and dressing, she made her way downstairs, following the sounds of voices to the kitchen at the back of the house. Nathan sat at a large wooden table with a man who must have been Miguel, both of them looking over what appeared to be maps. Elena was the first to notice her, turning from the stove with a warm smile. "Ah, you are awake. Come sit. You must be hungry." Nathan looked up, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her, a softening around the eyes. "Perhaps." "How's the arm?" he asked. "Better," Josephine replied, taking a seat at the table. "Thank you for the clothes. They belong to my sister," Elena explained, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "She lives in town with her husband. You are of similar size. I didn't know if your things could be salvaged," Nathan added. "Elena will see what can be done with them." The food was delicious, and Josephine realized how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. As she ate, she observed the three people who had taken her in. Miguel was older than Nathan by perhaps 15 years, with silver threading through his black hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of a life spent outdoors. Elena moved around the kitchen with the confidence of a woman who knew her domain perfectly. And Nathan. Nathan watched her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "We were just discussing the best route to San Francisco," Nathan said when she'd finished eating. "There's a problem." "What kind of problem?" she asked. Miguel pushed the map toward her. "The men who are looking for you arrived at first light to speak with the sheriff. They are saying you stole valuable documents and money from your husband." Josephine's stomach clenched. "That's a lie. The documents are mine by right, and I didn't take a penny that wasn't my own inheritance." "We know that," Nathan assured her. "But the sheriff doesn't. These men have official-looking papers, warrants for your arrest signed by a judge in Massachusetts." "What?" she gasped. "How is that possible?" "Money talks," Miguel said simply. "And your husband seems to have plenty of it." Josephine's mind raced. "Then I need to leave immediately. I can't let you all get in trouble for harboring me." "No," Nathan said firmly. "Running now would be the worst thing you could do. Sheriff Holloway is a good man, but he takes his job seriously. If he thinks you're a fugitive, he'll have no choice but to bring you in." "So what do you suggest?" she asked, frustration rising. "I sit here and wait to be arrested for crimes I didn't commit?" Nathan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Not exactly. I have a different idea." The plan, as Nathan explained it, was both simple and audacious. Since the men looking for her didn't know she was at the Doubleby Ranch, they had some time to establish her presence in the community as something other than a fugitive. "The town is holding its Founders' Day celebration this weekend," Nathan explained. "Everyone for 50 miles around will be there. We'll attend together as a couple. You'll be introduced as Josephine Brooks, my fiancée from back east." "Your fiancée?" she repeated, startled. "It explains your sudden appearance at my ranch and gives you a reason to stay in town," he said practically. "No one will question it too deeply. Folks around here have been after me to settle down for years." Elena nodded approvingly. "It is a good plan. No one will think to connect Nathan Blackburn's fiancée with the woman those men are seeking." "But what about my appearance?" Josephine asked. "What if they recognize me?" You'd be surprised what a different hairstyle and clothes can do, Nathan said. And those men are looking for a woman traveling alone, not the future wife of one of the largest landowners in the county. Miguel chuckled. It is true. People see what they expect to see. Josephine considered the plan. It was risky, but it might work at least long enough for her to figure out how to get to San Francisco without being captured. And truthfully, she had few other options. All right, she agreed finally. I'll be your fiancé, Mr. Blackburn. Nathan, he corrected again, and this time his smile reached his eyes. If we're engaged, you really should use my given name. She felt her cheeks warm inexplicably. Nathan, then. Good, he said, standing. I need to ride into town today to make our first public appearance together. Think you're up to it? The thought of facing the town and possibly the men hunting her sent a flutter of panic through Josephine's chest, but she straightened her shoulders. I'll manage. Elena clapped her hands together. First, we must make you look the part of a rancher's fiancé. Come, I will help you. An hour later, Josephine hardly recognized herself in the small mirror Elena held up for her. Her long blonde hair had been arranged in a simpler style than the elaborate coiffures she'd worn in Boston, with soft waves framing her face. The dress Elena had provided was well made but practical, in a deep blue that complemented her eyes. Most striking was the change in her own expression. There was still wariness there, but something else too. A glimmer of hope, perhaps. You look beautiful, Elena declared. Nathan will not have to pretend to be proud of his fiancée. Josephine blushed again. It's just for show, Elena. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. We will see. Now come. Nathan is waiting. Nathan was indeed waiting in the front hall, dressed in what was clearly his best clothing: clean black pants, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He wore a gun belt low on his hips, something Josephine hadn't noticed the night before in the darkness. When he turned and saw her, his expression changed in a way that made Josephine's pulse quicken. It was more than appreciation. It was as if he was truly seeing her for the first time. You look, he began, then seemed to search for the right word. Right? You look right. It wasn't the most eloquent compliment she'd ever received, but somehow it meant more than all the flowery praise Harlan had ever lavished on her. Nathan's honesty was refreshing after years of carefully calculated social niceties. Thank you, she said simply. Shall we go? The ride to town was less hurried than their midnight flight had been. Nathan pointed out landmarks as they traveled the boundaries of his property. The creek that supplied water to the ranch, the distant mountains that formed the backdrop to the valley. How did you come to own such a large ranch? Josephine asked as they rode side by side on the well-maintained road. Nathan had insisted she ride her own horse this time, a gentle mare named Daisy. Luck mostly, he replied. The original owner, old Bill Barrett, was a friend of your father's from their gold rush days. When I came west after the war, your father wrote to Bill asking him to give me a job. I started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman. When Bill died 5 years ago, he left the place to me. Said I was the son he never had. That seems like more than luck, Josephine observed. It sounds like you earned his respect. Nathan shrugged, but she could tell her words had pleased him. Bill was a good man. Taught me everything I know about ranching. He glanced over at her. Your father was the same kind of man. Loyal to those who were loyal to him. Yes, he was, she agreed, her throat tightening with emotion. I miss him every day. Tell me about Boston, Nathan said after a moment, clearly trying to shift to a less painful topic. What was your life like there? Josephine considered the question. Structured. Every hour of the day had its purpose: social calls to make, charities to support, events to attend. Women of my social standing weren't meant to be idle. Sounds exhausting, Nathan commented. She laughed, surprised by his candor. It was sometimes, but there were good parts too. I enjoyed the libraries, the concerts, the intellectual discussions. Boston can be a place of great ideas and progress. And now, he asked, do you miss it? I miss what it was before Harlan, she admitted. The safety, the certainty. But I've found there's something freeing about having all of that stripped away. When you have nothing left to lose, you discover what truly matters. Nathan's eyes held hers for a long moment. And what matters to Josephine Campbell? Justice, she replied without hesitation. For my father. And freedom, the chance to build a life of my own choosing. He nodded slowly. Good things to fight for. They crested a small hill and Willow Creek came into view below them. In the daylight, Josephine could see it was larger than she'd thought. A proper town with several streets, a school, churches, and businesses catering to the surrounding ranches and farms. Remember, Nathan said as they approached the outskirts. You're Josephine Brooks from Philadelphia. We met when I traveled east on business last year, corresponded for months, and I finally convinced you to come west to marry me. Philadelphia, not Boston, she confirmed. And we're to be married soon. That's right. Most folks will be too polite to ask for many details, but if anyone gets too curious, let me handle it. As they rode down the main street, Josephine was aware of curious glances from townspeople going about their business. Nathan nodded greetings to several people, occasionally stopping to introduce Josephine as Miss Brooks, my fiancée. Each time, she smiled and played her part, speaking in what she hoped was a convincing Eastern accent different from her natural Boston one. People seemed genuinely pleased to meet her, several women immediately inviting her to join various social groups and church activities. Nathan Blackburn finally caught himself a wife, declared a rotund man emerging from the general store. Never thought I'd see the day. Judge Parker. Nathan greeted him, dismounting and helping Josephine down from her horse. I'd like you to meet Miss Josephine Brooks, recently of Philadelphia. The judge, a jovial man with an impressive white beard, beamed at Josephine. A pleasure, my dear. You must be quite a woman to have captured our confirmed bachelor here. The pleasure is mine, Judge Parker, Josephine replied with a smile. And I assure you, Nathan did most of the capturing. The judge laughed heartily. I like her, Blackburn. She'll keep you on your toes. As they continued their errands, Josephine began to relax slightly into her role. No one seemed suspicious of her, and there was no sign of the men who'd been looking for her the night before. Where are they? She asked quietly as Nathan led her toward the mercantile. The men who were asking about me. According to what I heard at the bank, they took rooms at the hotel, he replied, keeping his voice low. They told Sheriff Holloway they'd be staying until they found you. The mercantile was a large, well-stocked establishment that seemed to carry everything from farm equipment to fine fabrics. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Nathan warmly. Mr. Blackburn, what can I do for you today? Mr. Peterson, I'd like to introduce my fiancée, Miss Josephine Brooks, Nathan said, his hand resting lightly on the small of Josephine's back. She's just arrived from Philadelphia and finds herself in need of a few things. Peterson's eyebrows rose in surprise. Fiancé? Well, congratulations to you both. He turned to Josephine with a little bow. Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Brooks. We have a fine selection of ladies' goods in the back corner. My wife usually assists our female customers, but she's visiting her sister in Helena. I'd be happy to show you what we have. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Josephine said. That's very kind. As she examined the fabrics and ready-made items, she was aware of Nathan watching her from across the store, where he was discussing an order of fence posts with Peterson's assistant. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and dependable. She had just selected several lengths of fabric when the bell above the door jangled. Two men entered, their city clothes and hard eyes immediately setting them apart from the locals. Josephine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized them, Harlan's men, the same ones who had been following her since Denver. Nathan moved casually to stand between her and the newcomers, his back to them as he spoke to her. "Don't look at them," he murmured. "Keep examining the fabrics." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she held up a bolt of calico. "They're the ones," she whispered. "Harrison and Mueller, Harlan's most trusted men." "Mr. Peterson," one of the men called out, "we're looking for some supplies for our continued stay." "Of course, gentlemen," Peterson replied. "I'll be with you in a moment." Nathan turned, positioning himself so that he partially blocked Josephine from view while appearing to simply be making room in the crowded store. "Take these to the counter," he told her in a normal voice, handing her the items she'd selected. "I just remembered I need to speak with the sheriff about the arrangements for the Founders' Day celebration." Josephine understood his strategy immediately. He was giving her a reason to leave the store while he stayed to observe the men. "Of course, darling," she replied, infusing her voice with affection. "Shall I meet you at the cafe afterward?" "Perfect," he agreed, and then, to her shock, he leaned down and pressed a quick kiss to her cheek. "Don't keep me waiting too long," he added with a wink. The casual gesture of affection was clearly for the benefit of their audience, but it sent a surprising warmth through Josephine nonetheless. She made her purchases quickly, keeping her face turned away from Harlan's men, and hurried out the door. The sheriff's office was just down the street, and Josephine entered with her heart still racing from the close encounter. Sheriff Holloway, a weathered man in his 50s with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner, looked up from his desk. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked. "I'm Josephine Brooks," she said, deciding to stick to her role completely. "Nathan Blackburn's fiancé. He asked me to tell you he'll be along shortly to discuss the Founders' Day arrangements." The sheriff's expression brightened. "So you're the young lady Nathan's been hiding away at the ranch. Word travels fast in a small town." He stood and offered his hand. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Brooks." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, shaking his hand. "It's a lovely town." "That it is," he agreed. "Though we've had some excitement lately. Some city fellows looking for a fugitive woman. Don't suppose you noticed anyone unusual on your way into town yesterday?" Josephine maintained a neutral expression with effort. "No, sir. The journey was quite uneventful." "What has this woman done?" "Theft, primarily," Holloway said, sitting back down. "Stole some important papers and money from her husband back east. Seems she's been on the run for months, working her way west. Name's Campbell." Josephine Campbell. She felt a chill at hearing her own name spoken as that of a criminal. "How dreadful," she managed to say. "I hope you catch her. Those city men seem confident she's somewhere in the area," the sheriff continued. "But between you and me, I'm not convinced. Something doesn't add up about their story." Before Josephine could respond, the door opened and Nathan entered. His eyes moved quickly between her and the sheriff, assessing the situation. "Holloway," he greeted the older man. "I see you've met my fiancée." "Indeed I have," the sheriff replied with a smile. "You're a lucky man, Blackburn." "Don't I know it?" Nathan agreed, moving to stand beside Josephine. His hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Are we all set for Saturday's festivities?" As the men discussed the upcoming celebration, Josephine found herself studying Nathan's profile. In just over 12 hours, this man had transformed from a stranger to her protector, ally, and now, pretend fiancé. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, a steadiness that Harlan, for all his charm and polish, had never possessed. When they left the sheriff's office, Nathan guided her toward a small cafe on the corner, his hand still holding hers. Harrison and Mueller are still at the Mercantile, he told her quietly. But they'll likely be looking for you all over town. The cafe has a back room where we can talk privately. The cafe was warm and inviting, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh baked bread. The proprietress, a plump woman with rosy cheeks, seated them in a small room at the back usually reserved for private parties. For the happy couple, she said with a wink as she brought them coffee and slices of apple pie. On the house as an engagement present. When they were alone, Josephine let her shoulders slump slightly. That was closer than I'd like, she admitted. If they had gotten a good look at me. But they didn't, Nathan reminded her. And now we know who we're dealing with. Harrison and Mueller are dangerous men, she said, her voice low despite their privacy. They've done Harlan's dirty work for years. If they're here personally instead of just hired guns, it means Harlan is truly desperate to find me. Nathan's expression hardened. They won't touch you, I promise you that. There was such conviction in his voice that Josephine found herself believing him, despite the odds against them. The sheriff seems suspicious of their story, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. That's something, at least. Holloway is no fool, Nathan agreed. But he's also bound by the law. If those warrants they're carrying are legitimate, he'll have to act on them. So what's our next move? She asked. Nathan leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. We maintain our cover. Attend the Founders' Day celebration as planned. Meanwhile, I've sent a telegram to a friend in Denver who works for the Territorial Marshal's office. He may be able to help us get you to San Francisco safely. Josephine nodded slowly. And if Harrison and Mueller recognize me before then? His eyes met hers, steady and determined. Then we'll deal with that too. But they won't take you, Josephine. Not while I'm breathing. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her that way before, as if her safety was the most important thing in the world to them. Not even her father, who had loved her dearly but had always been somewhat distracted by business concerns. Why are you doing all this? She asked quietly. Your promise to my father can't possibly extend this far. Nathan was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if searching for something. Finally, he said, Your father saved my life, in more ways than one. When I came back from the war, I was lost, broken in ways that didn't show on the outside. Thomas saw something in me worth salvaging when others had written me off as damaged goods. He gave me a purpose when I needed one most. He paused, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. But it's more than that now. You're not what I expected, Josephine Campbell. You've been through hell, but you're still fighting, still standing. That kind of courage deserves to be honored. His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been closed off since her father's death. Thank you, she whispered, unable to say more past the lump in her throat. They finished their meal in a comfortable silence, and when they left the cafe, Nathan kept her hand firmly in his as they walked back to where they'd left their horses. Harrison and Mueller just went into the hotel, he noted, nodding toward the two-story building across the street. We should be able to get out of town without them noticing. As they rode back to the ranch, Josephine found herself thinking about how quickly her life had changed yet again. Just 24 hours ago, she had been alone and terrified, convinced that Harlan's men would eventually catch her. Now she had allies, a plan, and perhaps, if she dared to hope, a chance at justice. She glanced at Nathan riding beside her, his face set in thoughtful lines, and wondered if she might have found something else as well, something she hadn't been looking for but might have been seeking all along. The next few days fell into a pattern that was both strange and comforting to Josephine. During the day, she and Nathan would ride into town, playing their roles as the engaged couple. They visited shops, attended a church social, and generally made themselves visible to the townspeople. Each appearance strengthened their cover story and made it less likely that anyone would connect Josephine Brooks with the fugitive Josephine Campbell. Harrison and Mueller remained in town, questioning people and occasionally riding out to neighboring ranches and farms in their search. Once, they came to the Doubleby Ranch itself, but Josephine had been well hidden in Elena's herb garden at the back of the house, and Nathan had played the helpful but clueless rancher to perfection. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Nathan would join Josephine on the porch, where they would talk for hours. She told him about her childhood in Boston, her education, and her complicated relationship with her father, who had loved her but never quite understood her independent spirit. In turn, he shared stories of his time in the Union Army during the war, his difficult return to civilian life, and his gradual healing in the wide open spaces of Montana. "I never thought I'd feel whole again," he admitted one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "The things I saw, the things I did during the war, they change a man." "But you found your way back," Josephine said softly. He nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "This land has a way of putting things in perspective. Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not where he came from or who his family is." "I envy that," she said. "In Boston, your place in society is determined at birth. It's almost impossible to change." Nathan turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "Is that what you want? To change your place?" She considered the question carefully. "I want the freedom to choose my place, to build a life based on my own decisions, not expectations set by others." "And what would that life look like?" he asked. "If you could choose anything." The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on escaping Harlan, on surviving, that she hadn't allowed herself to think too far beyond that immediate goal. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Something meaningful. Something that makes a difference. I have a good head for business. My father taught me that much before he died. Perhaps I could build something of my own." "I think you could," Nathan said with a certainty that warmed her. "You're stronger than you know, Josephine." In those quiet moments, with the vast Montana sky above them and the gentle sounds of the ranch around them, Josephine found herself drawn to Nathan in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. He was unlike any man she had ever known, direct, honest, without pretense or artifice. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. But she reminded herself that their relationship was built on necessity, not choice. Once she reached San Francisco and presented her evidence against Harlan, she would need to build that new life she spoke of. And Nathan had his ranch, his responsibilities here in Montana. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to stay, to make this place her home. The thought came to her unbidden one morning as she helped Elena in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with flour-covered hands. "You have changed him," Elena said suddenly, breaking into Josephine's thoughts. "What do you mean?" Josephine asked, looking up from her task. "Nathan," Elena replied, her hands never stopping their work slicing vegetables. "Before you came, he was, how do you say, closed, like a book that no one is allowed to read. Now he smiles more, talks more." "We're just playing a part," Josephine protested weakly. "For the townspeople." Elena's knowing smile was back. "Is that what you tell yourself? I have seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. That is not pretend." Josephine felt her cheeks grow warm. "Elena, you do not have to say anything," the older woman interrupted gently. "Just know that sometimes, the things we find when we are not looking are the most valuable of all." Before Josephine could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Elena moved to the window, peering out. "It is Nathan and Miguel," she reported. "And someone else. A stranger." Josephine tensed automatically, her mind immediately going to Harrison and Mueller. But Elena's next words dispelled that fear. "A marshal," she said, noting the badge visible even from a distance. Perhaps Nathan's friend from Denver has arrived. Minutes later, Nathan entered the kitchen with a tall, lean man whose weathered face spoke of years spent outdoors. The silver star on his chest identified him as a U.S. Marshal. "Josephine, this is Marshal James Harker," Nathan introduced them. "Jim, this is Josephine Campbell." The Marshal nodded respectfully. "Miss Campbell, I've heard quite a bit about you from Nathan's telegram." "Thank you for coming, Marshal," Josephine said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope Nathan explained the situation." "He did," Harker confirmed. "And I've been doing some investigating of my own. Seems your ex-husband has been busy creating a false trail of crimes to pin on you. Those warrants Harrison and Mueller are carrying? They're legitimate documents based on false testimony. Can you help her get to San Francisco?" Nathan asked, his expression tense. Harker nodded. "That's why I'm here. I'm escorting a prisoner to California next week. I can take Miss Campbell along as a protected witness. Once we're in San Francisco, I'll connect her with the federal prosecutor who's building the case against Doyle." Relief washed over Josephine like a wave. "When do we leave?" "Monday morning," the Marshal replied. "I need to wrap up some business in Helena first. I'll be back for you then." "What about Harrison and Mueller?" Nathan asked. "I've already spoken with Sheriff Holloway," Harker said. "Explained that there's an ongoing federal investigation into Doyle's activities. He's agreed to keep an eye on those two but not to interfere with them directly. We don't want to tip our hand." Nathan nodded, though Josephine could see he wasn't entirely satisfied with this arrangement. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, you keep doing what you've been doing," Harker advised. "Maintain the cover story. Attend the Founders' Day celebration tomorrow as planned. The less disruption to your normal routine, the better." After the Marshal left, promising to return on Sunday evening to finalize their plans, Josephine found herself alone with Nathan in the study. He stood by the window, his posture rigid with tension. "You don't seem pleased with the Marshal's plan," she observed. "It's not that," Nathan said, turning to face her. "Jim Harker is a good man and a friend. If anyone can get you safely to San Francisco, it's him." "Then what is it?" she pressed. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. "It's just happening faster than I expected. You'll be gone in 3 days." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "It's for the best," she said softly, though the thought of leaving brought an unexpected ache to her chest. "The sooner I get to San Francisco, the sooner I can clear my name and bring Harlan to justice." "I know," Nathan agreed, his eyes holding hers. "And I want that for you. You deserve to be free of him." He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "But these past few days, having you here," he trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. Josephine's heart beat faster as he reached out to gently touch her cheek. "I know," she whispered. "I've felt it too." Something shifted in his expression then, a softening, a surrender. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. But it left Josephine breathless nonetheless. "I shouldn't have done that," Nathan said, though he made no move to step away from her. "Why not?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because when you leave, it will be that much harder to let you go," he admitted, the raw honesty in his voice making her chest tighten. She wanted to tell him that she didn't have to go, that she could stay here with him. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Harlan would never stop looking for her unless he was behind bars, and the only way to ensure that was to get her evidence to San Francisco. "We still have 3 days, she said instead, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his stubble beneath her fingers. Nathan turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, the gesture achingly tender. 3 days, he repeated softly. Let's make them count. The day of the Founders' Day celebration dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late summer day that seemed designed for outdoor festivities. The entire town of Willow Creek had turned out for the event, with families setting up picnic blankets in the town square, children running and playing games, and local musicians providing lively tunes from a makeshift bandstand. Josephine wore her finest borrowed dress, a creation of deep green that Elena had altered to fit her perfectly. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, with a few fresh flowers tucked into the waves. As she and Nathan made their way through the crowd, she was struck by how many people greeted her by name, how many genuine smiles were directed her way. In just a few days, she had become part of this community, even if under false pretenses. You look beautiful, Nathan said, his eyes never leaving her face as they strolled between the various booths and displays. You've said that 3 times already, she teased, though his obvious admiration pleased her. And I'll probably say it 3 more times before the day is over, he replied with a grin. It happens to be true. They stopped to watch a group of children participating in a 3-legged race, laughing at their uncoordinated efforts. It struck Josephine how natural it felt to be here with Nathan, how easily they had fallen into the rhythm of being a couple. If circumstances had been different. She pushed the thought away. Dwelling on what might have been would only make tomorrow's parting more painful. Nathan! Miss Brooks! Sheriff Holloway called out, approaching them with a friendly wave. Enjoying the festivities? Indeed we are, Sheriff, Nathan replied. Josephine was just saying she's never seen such a well-organized celebration. Our town council works hard on these events, Holloway said proudly. Speaking of which, Nathan, Judge Parker is looking for you. Something about the shooting contest you're supposed to be judging? Nathan nodded. I almost forgot. Would you mind keeping Josephine company for a few minutes while I sort that out? It would be my pleasure, the sheriff assured him. As Nathan made his way toward the far end of the square, Holloway offered Josephine his arm. May I escort you to the refreshment table, Miss Brooks? Mrs. Holloway makes the best lemonade in the territory. Josephine accepted with a smile, and they strolled across the square, exchanging pleasantries. She was just beginning to relax when she spotted them Harrison and Mueller, moving purposefully through the crowd in their direction. Her step faltered, and Holloway glanced at her with concern. Are you all right, Miss Brooks? You've gone pale. I'm fine, she managed, trying to turn away from the approaching men. Just a momentary dizziness. Perhaps we could find some shade. But it was too late. Harrison had spotted her, and recognition dawned in his cold eyes. He nudged Mueller and pointed in her direction. Sheriff, Harrison called out, quickening his pace. A moment of your time, if you please. Holloway turned, still holding Josephine's arm. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Harrison's gaze never left Josephine's face. I believe you're in the company of the woman we've been searching for. That's Josephine Campbell, not Brooks. She's a fugitive wanted for theft and fraud back east. A murmur went through the nearby crowd as people turned to stare. Josephine felt her chest constrict, panic threatening to overwhelm her. That's a serious accusation, Holloway said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Do you have proof? The warrants we showed you, Mueller replied, and we can identify her. We've been pursuing her for months. Miss Brooks. Holloway turned to Josephine, his expression unreadable. Do you have anything to say to these allegations? Josephine straightened her shoulders, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. My name is Josephine Campbell, she admitted, her voice steady despite her fear. But I am not guilty of the crimes they claim. The warrants are based on false testimony from my ex-husband, Harlan Doyle, who is trying to silence me because I have evidence of his criminal activities. Harrison stepped forward, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. Sheriff, we'll take her now. Our employer will see that she faces justice back east. I don't think so, came Nathan's voice from behind them. He had returned, alerted by the commotion, and now stood with his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Josephine is under my protection. The tension in the air was palpable as the townspeople fell silent, watching the confrontation unfold. This doesn't concern you, Blackburn, Harrison said coldly. This woman is a thief and a liar. She's been deceiving you and everyone else in this town. The only deception, Nathan replied evenly, was in her name. Everything else, who she is, what she's running from, that's all true. And she's not running anymore. Not from you, not from Doyle. Holloway looked between them, his hand now resting on his own weapon. I think we all need to take this conversation to my office. This is a day of celebration, not confrontation. I agree, said a new voice, and Josephine turned to see Marshal Harker approaching, his badge clearly visible on his chest. U.S. Marshal Harker. Miss Campbell is a material witness in a federal investigation into Harlan Doyle's business practices. She's under my protection as of now. Harrison and Mueller exchanged glances, clearly not having anticipated this development. We have legitimate warrants, Mueller argued, signed by a judge in Massachusetts. Based on false testimony, Harker countered, which makes them invalid. I've already telegraphed the federal judge in Helena, who has issued a stay on any action against Miss Campbell until the matter can be properly investigated. Holloway nodded slowly. Seems to me the federal jurisdiction takes precedence here, gentlemen. I'll need to see the stay order, Marshal, but assuming it's in order, Miss Campbell remains free for now. Harrison's face contorted with anger. You're making a mistake. Doyle won't stand for this interference. Doyle's opinion doesn't carry much weight in Montana territory, Nathan said coolly. Now, I suggest you gentlemen go back to your hotel and pack your bags. The next stage leaves at dawn tomorrow. I recommend you be on it. For a tense moment, it seemed Harrison might challenge this directive. His hand twitched toward his gun, but Mueller grabbed his arm, shaking his head slightly. Even they weren't foolish enough to take on a U.S. Marshal, a sheriff, and a determined rancher in the middle of a town full of witnesses. This isn't over, Harrison warned, his eyes full of malice as they met Josephine's. Doyle will find you. Let him try, she replied, finding strength in Nathan's steady presence beside her. I'm not afraid of him anymore. As Harrison and Mueller stalked away, the crowd that had gathered began to disperse, though Josephine could hear the whispers and speculation spreading like wildfire. I apologize for arriving early and unannounced, Harker said to Nathan and Josephine. But I had a feeling those two might try something today, with so many people around. Your timing was perfect, Nathan assured him, his hand finding Josephine's and squeezing gently. What happens now? Now, Harker said, we get Miss Campbell to San Francisco as planned. I've arranged for us to leave on tomorrow morning's stage. Harrison and Mueller will be under observation to ensure they don't try anything tonight. Josephine looked around at the town square, at the celebration continuing despite the brief drama. Children still played, music still played, life went on. And tomorrow, she would leave this place that had so quickly begun to feel like home. If you'll excuse us, Nathan said to Harker and Holloway, I believe I promised my fiancée a dance before the shooting contest begins. Neither man missed the significance of Nathan continuing the pretense, but both nodded understandingly. As Nathan led Josephine toward the area where couples were dancing to a lively fiddle tune, she looked up at him questioningly. Your fiancé? She asked softly. You don't have to maintain the charade anymore, Nathan. Everyone knows the truth now. Not everyone, he replied, drawing her into his arms as they joined the dancers. And not the whole truth. What do you mean? She asked, her pulse quickening at the intensity in his gaze. I mean that some parts weren't pretend, he said, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. Not for me. The music swirled around them as they moved together, and for a moment, Josephine allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she didn't have to leave tomorrow, where what had grown between them could have time to fully blossom. I wish, she began, then stopped herself. What do you wish? Nathan asked, his hand warm against the small of her back as he guided her through the steps of the dance. I wish we had more time, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the music. His eyes softened. So do I. But I want you to know something, Josephine Campbell. When this is all over, when Doyle is behind bars and you're free to build that life you talked about, there will be a place for you here, if you want it. The simple statement, delivered without drama or grand declarations, touched Josephine deeply. It wasn't a desperate plea for her to stay or an attempt to hold her back from what she needed to do. It was a promise, a door left open, a possibility for the future. Thank you, she whispered, resting her head against his chest as the music slowed. I'll remember that. As the sun set on Josephine's last night at the Doubleby Ranch, she and Nathan sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. The house was quiet, Elena and Miguel having tactfully retired early to give them privacy. I've packed the documents safely in my traveling case, Josephine said, breaking the companionable silence. Marshal Harker says we should reach San Francisco in about 10 days, barring any delays. Nathan nodded, his arm around her shoulders drawing her closer to his side. Jim will see you safely there. He's the best man I know for the job. What do you think will happen? She asked. With Harlan, if the evidence is as damning as you say, and with a federal prosecutor already building a case against him, I'd say he's looking at a long stay in prison, Nathan replied. Men like Doyle usually overreach eventually. Their own arrogance brings them down. I hope you're right, she said. I want justice for my father, and for the others Harlan has hurt over the years. You'll get it, Nathan assured her. And then you'll be free to start over. Josephine turned slightly to look at his profile, silvered by the moonlight. I've been thinking about what that might look like, starting over. His eyes met hers, a question in their depths. And I think, she said carefully, that when all this is done I might like to see Montana again. In the springtime, perhaps, when Elena says the wildflowers cover the hills. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face, transforming his features. Spring in Montana is something to behold, he agreed. Worth coming back for. Is that the only thing worth coming back for? She asked, her heart beating faster. Nathan's hand came up to gently cup her cheek. No, he said simply. Not the only thing. When he kissed her this time, there was nothing hesitant about it. His lips claimed hers with a certainty, a rightness that made Josephine feel as if she'd finally found her way home after a long journey. She wound her arms around his neck, returning the kiss with equal fervor, pouring into it all the emotions that had been building since the night he found her hiding in the shadows. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I've never felt this way about anyone before, he confessed. I need you to know that before you go. Nor I, Josephine replied honestly. With Harlan, it was all artifice, a carefully orchestrated courtship designed to gain my father's approval and access to our business. It's real. Unexpected, but real. When you return, Nathan said, his voice husky with emotion. If you return, I want to do this properly. No pretending, no hiding. Just us, building something together. The promise in his words warmed Josephine from within. I'd like that, she whispered. Very much. They stayed on the porch late into the night, talking of the future, of possibilities, of dreams long set aside that might now be within reach. And when the eastern sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, they faced the coming parting with both sadness and hope. The stage was scheduled to leave Willow Creek at 8 o'clock. Nathan drove Josephine and Marshall Harker into town in the ranch wagon, their luggage secured in the back. The town was quiet this early, most people still recovering from the previous day's celebration. As they approached the stagecoach station, Josephine spotted Sheriff Holloway standing on the boardwalk, watching as Harrison and Mueller boarded the eastbound stage. The men shot venomous glances in their direction but made no move to interfere, not with both the sheriff and marshal present. "Looks like our friends are leaving as instructed," Harker observed with satisfaction, "though I wouldn't put it past them to telegraph ahead to Doyle once they reach a larger town." "By then, you'll be well on your way to San Francisco," Nathan said to Josephine. "And Doyle will have more immediate problems than tracking you down." The westbound stage arrived right on schedule, its team of 6 horses stamping and snorting after the long run from the previous stop. The driver, a weather-beaten man with a spectacular mustache, greeted Harker by name. "Jim, heard you might be joining us today. Helena to San Francisco's a long haul." "That it is, Charlie," Harker replied, "but duty calls. This is Miss Campbell, who'll be traveling under my protection." The driver tipped his hat to Josephine. "Madam, we'll do our best to make the journey comfortable, though I can't promise it won't be dusty." While Harker supervised the loading of their luggage, Nathan drew Josephine slightly apart from the others. They had said their private goodbyes at the ranch, but still, the moment of parting was harder than either had anticipated. "Write to me," Nathan said, his hands holding hers tightly. "Let me know how the case progresses." "I will," she promised. "And you'll write back?" He nodded. "Every week. More often if you want." "I want," she said with a small smile. "Miss Campbell," Harker called. "We're ready to depart." Nathan raised her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "Remember what I said. When this is over, there's a place for you here." "I'll remember," she assured him, her eyes memorizing every detail of his face. "Wait for me. As long as it takes," he vowed. The final boarding call came, and Josephine reluctantly pulled herself away. Nathan helped her into the stage, and for one last moment, their eyes met through the open door, a silent communication that said everything words could not. Then the door closed, the driver called to the horses, and the stage lurched forward. Josephine leaned out the window, watching Nathan's figure grow smaller as the distance between them increased. He stood straight and tall, one hand raised in farewell, until the stage rounded a bend in the road and he disappeared from view. Settling back into her seat, Josephine touched the simple silver ring Nathan had pressed into her hand during their goodbye that morning. Not an engagement ring, they both knew it was too soon for that, but a promise. A tangible reminder of what awaited her when her business in San Francisco was concluded. "He's a good man," Harker commented, noting the ring and the wistful expression on her face. "Yes," Josephine agreed softly. "The best I've ever known." "Then I suspect Montana hasn't seen the last of you," the marshal said with a knowing smile. Josephine slipped the ring onto her finger, where it caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window. "No," she said with certainty. "It hasn't." The journey to San Francisco was long and arduous, but Josephine barely noticed the discomforts. Her mind was occupied with thoughts of the case against Harlan, the evidence she carried, and the future that might be waiting for her when it was all over. Harker proved to be an excellent traveling companion, vigilant but not intrusive, willing to talk when she was in the mood for conversation but comfortable with silence when she wasn't. He shared stories of his years as a marshal of the frontier justice system and of his friendship with Nathan. "He saved my life once," Harker told her as their stage climbed the Sierra Nevada mountains. "Took a bullet meant for me during a bank robbery in Denver, back in '72. Nearly died." Josephine's hand went instinctively to the ring she now wore on a chain around her neck. "He never mentioned that." "He wouldn't," Harker said with a shrug. Nathan doesn't talk about his own good deeds, but I've known him for a decade, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The marshal's words warmed her, fueling her determination to see this through quickly and return to Montana to Nathan. San Francisco, when they finally arrived, was a shock to Josephine's system after the quiet expanses of Montana. The city bustled with energy and noise, a chaotic mix of cultures and classes all packed tightly together on its famous hills. It reminded her of Boston in some ways, but with a rawness, a newness that the older eastern city lacked. The federal prosecutor, Edwin Daniels, met them at his office the day after their arrival. He was a serious man in his 40s, with a reputation for being relentless in his pursuit of justice. He listened carefully as Josephine presented her evidence against Harlan Doyle: the forged documents, the financial records showing systematic fraud, the timeline of her father's sudden illness and death. "This is compelling material, Miss Campbell," Daniels said when she had finished. "Combined with what we've already gathered on Doyle's other business dealings, we have more than enough to present to a grand jury." "How long will that take?" she asked. "The grand jury is already convened for another case," Daniels replied. "I can present this evidence next week. If they return an indictment, as I expect they will, federal marshals will arrest Doyle in Boston immediately." "And then," Josephine pressed, "then he'll be transported to San Francisco for trial," the prosecutor explained. "The whole process could take several months, I'm afraid, and we'll need you to testify." Josephine nodded, having expected as much. "I'll do whatever is necessary to see him brought to justice." "In the meantime," Daniels continued, "you'll remain under Marshal Harker's protection. We've arranged accommodations for you at a boarding house run by a widow who has assisted witnesses in similar situations before. It's discreet and secure." As Josephine left the prosecutor's office with Harker, her emotions were mixed. On one hand, the wheels of justice were finally turning against Harlan. On the other, the realization that she would be separated from Nathan for months instead of weeks weighed heavily on her heart. "I need to telegraph Nathan," she told Harker. "Let him know what's happening." The marshal nodded understandingly. "Of course. We'll stop at the telegraph office on our way to the boarding house." Her message was necessarily brief. "Arrived safely. Stop. Prosecutor taking evidence to grand jury next week. Stop. Must remain for trial several months. Stop. Missing you already. Stop." Josephine. Nathan's reply came the following day. "Glad you arrived safely. Stop. Will wait however long necessary. Stop. Ranch and heart both empty without you. Stop." Nathan. Over the following weeks, as the case against Harlan Doyle progressed, Josephine found ways to make herself useful in San Francisco. Mrs. Hollister, the widow who ran the boarding house, introduced her to a group of women who worked to improve conditions for the city's poor, particularly immigrant families. Josephine threw herself into this work, finding that helping others eased the loneliness of being separated from Nathan. She wrote to him regularly, long letters describing her days, the people she met, the work she was doing. His replies were less frequent. Writing didn't come as naturally to him as it did to her, but no less treasured. He told her about developments at the ranch, about Elena's continued insistence that they prepare Josephine's room for her return, about the changing seasons in Montana. In early November, almost 3 months after she'd left Willow Creek, Josephine received news that sent her running to the telegraph office. Harlan Doyle arrested. Boston. Stop. Being transported San Francisco for trial. Stop. Arriving December 10th. Stop. Daniels. Her hands trembled as she composed a message to Nathan. Harlan arrested. Stop. Trial likely January. Stop. Maybe home by spring. Stop. All my love, Josephine. His reply arrived the next day. Shorter than usual, but no less meaningful. Counting the days. Stop. Love, Nathan. It was the first time either of them had used that word in their correspondence, though Josephine had felt it in her heart since those days on the ranch. Seeing it in Nathan's plain, direct handwriting brought tears to her eyes. The trial of Harlan Doyle began in January 1879, creating a sensation in San Francisco. The Eastern businessman charged with fraud, embezzlement, and suspected involvement in the death of his father-in-law was front-page news. Josephine steeled herself for the ordeal of testifying, of facing Harlan across the courtroom, of having her character attacked by his lawyers. What she hadn't prepared for was the sight of Nathan Blackburn sitting in the back row of the courtroom on the first day of the trial. She spotted him as she was being escorted to her seat by Marshall Harker. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things, a wishful hallucination born of longing. But then he stood, and their eyes met across the crowded room, and she knew he was real. It took every ounce of self-control she possessed not to run to him then and there. Protocol and propriety demanded she maintain her composure, especially with the eyes of the court and the press upon her. But her heart raced, and she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. Nathan nodded once, a small gesture that somehow conveyed everything she needed to know. He was here. He would stay until it was over. She wasn't alone. The proceedings began, and Josephine forced herself to focus on the matter at hand. Harlan was brought in, looking thinner and less polished than she remembered, but still carrying himself with the arrogance that had once charmed Boston society. He didn't look at her, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead as the charges were read. Over the next 2 weeks, the prosecution presented its case methodically. Witnesses testified about Harlan's business practices, about discrepancies in financial records, about the pattern of deception that had characterized his career. Josephine herself spent 3 days on the stand, detailing her discovery of the forged documents, her father's sudden illness, and Harlan's violent reaction when confronted. Through it all, Nathan remained a steady presence in the courtroom. Each day, he would find a moment to speak with her briefly during recesses, his hand touching hers when no one was looking, his quiet strength bolstering her resolve. "You're doing beautifully," he told her after a particularly grueling day of cross-examination. "Everyone can see he's guilty." "His lawyers are good," she replied, worried. "They're trying to make me look like a hysterical woman who misunderstood business matters." "No one who hears you speak could possibly think that," Nathan assured her. "You're the most clear-headed, intelligent woman I've ever known." His unfailing confidence in her was a balm to her spirit, helping her endure the strain of the trial. At night, in the privacy of her room at the boarding house, they would talk for hours, making up for the months of separation with words, with touches, with kisses that grew increasingly difficult to end. "I shouldn't be here like this," Nathan said one evening, even as he pulled her closer on the small settee in her sitting room. "Your reputation. My reputation was destroyed the moment I fled Boston," Josephine reminded him, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "And I don't care what people say. Having you here means everything to me." On the final day of the trial, as the jury retired to consider their verdict, Nathan took Josephine's hand and led her to a small park overlooking the bay. The January air was mild compared to the Montana winter he'd left behind, and the view of the water stretching to the horizon was breathtaking. "I have something to ask you," he said, his usual confidence giving way to an endearing nervousness. "Something I've been wanting to ask since the day you left Willow Creek." Josephine's heart began to pound as he took both her hands in his. "Nathan, I know it hasn't been that long in the usual way of things," he began. "But I think we both know there's nothing usual about how we found each other. When I saw you that night in the shadows, something inside me recognized you, even though we'd never met. Like you were the piece that had been missing, and suddenly everything made sense." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as he continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. "I love you, Josephine Campbell. I love your courage, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you faced down Harlan and his men, the way you've stood your ground in that courtroom day after day. I love imagining you at the ranch, making it a real home, building a life there. With me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Opening it, he revealed a ring far more elaborate, than the simple silver band he'd given her as a promise, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes holding hers. "Will you come back to Montana and be my wife, my partner, my everything?" "Yes," Josephine whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, Nathan, yes. I love you too. So much." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the silver band she'd never removed, Josephine felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. Against all odds, despite everything she'd endured, she had found love, found home, found the future she'd always longed for. They sealed the proposal with a kiss that held all the promise of the years to come, heedless of passers-by or propriety or anything but each other. When they returned to the courthouse, hand in hand and glowing with happiness, they learned that the jury had reached a verdict. As they filed back into the courtroom, Josephine squeezed Nathan's hand one last time before taking her place near the prosecution table. The verdict, when it came, was clear and unequivocal. Guilty on all counts. Harlan Doyle would spend the next 20 years in a federal prison. As he was led away, he finally looked at Josephine, his expression a mixture of hatred and defeat. But she felt no fear now, no lingering dread. He had no power over her anymore. "It's over," she said to Nathan as they left the courthouse, stepping into the bright January sunshine. "Really over." "Not over," he corrected gently, lifting her hand to kiss the rings she now wore. "Just beginning." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at a church in San Francisco, with Marshall Harker serving as Nathan's best man and Mrs. Hollister standing up for Josephine. Prosecutor Daniels attended as well, along with several of the women Josephine had worked with during her months in the city. It wasn't the grand society wedding she might once have expected, but it was perfect in every way that mattered. When Nathan kissed her after they were pronounced husband and wife, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. The journey back to Montana was a joyful one, despite the winter weather that occasionally delayed their progress. They traveled by train as far as the tracks would take them, then by stagecoach through the snow-covered landscape. Nathan pointed out landmarks along the way, his arm around his wife as they planned their future together. "I was thinking," Josephine said as they neared Willow Creek, "about what you said months ago about having a purpose." "What about it?" Nathan asked, tucking a blanket more securely around her against the February chill. "I think I've found mine," she replied. "In San Francisco, working with those immigrant families, I discovered I have a talent for teaching. I was thinking, Willow Creek School could use an additional teacher, couldn't it?" Nathan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. "It certainly could. The town's growing, and Miss Perkins has more students than she can handle. But are you sure that's what you want? You don't need to work, you know. Your father's estate—" "I know," she interrupted gently, "and we'll use that money wisely to improve the ranch to help the community. But I need something that's mine, Nathan. A way to contribute, to make a difference." He nodded understandingly. "Then that's what you'll do. And you'll be the finest teacher Willow Creek has ever seen." When they finally crested the hill that overlooked the town, Josephine felt a surge of emotion so strong it brought tears to her eyes. The snow-covered buildings, the smoke rising from chimneys, the mountains in the distance, it was more beautiful than she remembered. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackburn," Nathan said softly. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "It sounds wonderful." They were met at the ranch by Elena and Miguel, who had prepared a celebration to welcome them back. The house was warm and inviting, decorated with fresh greenery despite the winter season, and a feast was laid out on the dining table. "We are so happy you have returned," Elena said, embracing Josephine with genuine affection. "Both of you. The house has been too quiet." As they settled into life at the Doubleby Ranch, Josephine found herself falling into a rhythm that felt natural and right. She took on the role of Nathan's wife and partner with ease, learning the business of ranching, becoming a part of the community, and starting her work at the school 3 days a week. Spring came to Montana just as Elena had described, the hills carpeted with wildflowers, the air fresh and filled with the scent of new growth. Josephine often found herself pausing in her daily tasks to simply absorb the beauty around her, to marvel at the turn her life had taken. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they had maintained since those early days of her stay at the ranch, Nathan reached over to take her hand. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the contentment that radiated from her. "Completely," she assured him. "Though I might be even happier in about 7 months." He looked at her quizzically for a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Josephine? Are you saying yes?" she confirmed, her free hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Michaels confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Nathan." The joy that spread across his face was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms with a whoop of delight that startled a nearby horse, spinning her around on the porch before setting her down gently, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby. Our family," she corrected, her arms encircling his waist. "The one we're building together." As the sun's last rays painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine thought back to that night nearly a year ago, when she had hidden in the shadows of a frontier town, certain that her life was about to end. Instead, it had been just beginning. Nathan had found her in those shadows and recognized something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself, a strength, a resilience, a capacity for love that had survived everything life had thrown at her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About shadows and light," she replied. "About how sometimes we have to go through the darkest times to find our way to the brightest." Nathan kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise, as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the Montana sky. And Josephine Campbell Blackburn, once a frightened woman on the run, now a beloved wife, teacher, and soon-to-be mother, knew that she had found everything she had ever been seeking. In the years that followed, the Double B Ranch flourished under the joint stewardship of Nathan and Josephine Blackburn. Their family grew with the birth of a son, Thomas, named for Josephine's father, and 2 years later, a daughter they called Elizabeth. The house expanded too, with new rooms added to accommodate their growing family and the frequent guests who found their way to the Blackburns' welcoming home. Josephine's work at the school evolved into the establishment of a proper library for Willow Creek, funded in part by the settlement she eventually received from Harlan Doyle's estate after his death in prison in 1885. The citizens of the town, who had long since forgotten that she had once arrived among them in secrecy and fear, respected her as a community leader and trusted friend. Nathan, with his wife's encouragement, accepted a position on the territorial council, where his practical wisdom and unwavering integrity earned him the respect of colleagues and constituents alike. Together, they helped shape the growing territory that would eventually become the state of Montana, always advocating for the fair and just treatment of all its citizens. But for all their public accomplishments, it was their private life, the quiet evenings on the porch, the family meals filled with laughter, the partnership that deepened with each passing year that brought them the greatest joy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by friends, children, and even a few grandchildren, Nathan raised a glass to the woman who had changed his life that night long ago when she tried to hide in the shadows. "To Josephine," he said, his voice still strong though his hair had silvered over the years, "who taught me that the greatest treasure a man can find isn't gold in the mountains or cattle on the range, but the love of a brave and beautiful woman." And Josephine, looking at the life they had built together, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined back in Boston, raised her glass in return. "To finding each other," she said simply, "and to all the years ahead." In the warm glow of lantern light, surrounded by the family and community they loved, They sealed their toast with a kiss that held the same tenderness, the same passion, the same promise as the first one they had shared on a Montana porch nearly 3 decades earlier. And Josephine knew, with a certainty that filled her heart to overflowing, that some loves truly were destined to last forever, especially those born in the darkest shadows and nurtured in the brightest light.